have two historic preservation architects with us, Heidi Granke and Michael Dixon, who will be talking about our house, the Mies McCormick house, and of course the Farnsworth house. And I will let them tell you more about how they came to be with us and about the projects that they're advising us on. So thank you, and please feel free to help yourself to the wine. So I'm Heidi Granke, and I have a company here in town called Heritage Architecture Studio, and I do historic preservation. And so I got to work on this project because I met Jenny, and they needed somebody with a specialization in preservation here in town to help restore the McCormick house. So, and then I brought Mike Dixon into the project because Mike is very, very familiar with the Farnsworth house. He's on the advisory committee for that building. So that was kind of how we got involved. So just a little background. So those of you that don't know, Mies van der Rohe was born as Maria Ludwig Michael Mies. In the early 20s, he changed his name to Mies van der Rohe. Rohe is actually his mother's maiden name, so he just put a little banner between the two last names, and that was his new last name, and he kind of dropped the Maria and the Michael part. But his father and his family were stonemasons, so that's kind of where he got his initial training in how things work. He moved to Chicago in 1938 to escape Nazi Germany and became a professor at the Armor Institute, which is now IIT. So, of course, many of the buildings at IIT are ones that he designed. So this is a portrait of Mies, and also, of course, this is actually the first version. There's actually an update to this biography as well. So he's very well-known international architect. He did a lot of work in Germany and Europe before he came here, was already well-known even before he came to the States. So pretty important guy. As a side note, we have a Hugo Weber portrait of Mies hanging in the McCormick house right now. It's a pen and ink portrait. Which I think was a study for that painting. So Mies, all of the people that worked in his office were students. So he initially trained them as students and then hired them into his office. And the way he worked in the office is that he was still doing the design control of the projects, but he'd have a project architect that was in charge of each project. So on the Farnsworth house, Miriam Goldsmith, who became a very famous architect in his own right, was the project architect for that, as seen here with Dr. Farnsworth picking out materials and stuff. The project architect for the McCormick house was Joseph Fujikawa. Now Fujikawa was actually from California. He was a Japanese ancestry. And when World War II started, he was put into an internment camp for a few months. And then he applied to school here at IIT. He was interested in working with Mies, and it was a chance for him to get away from the coast and to be in school instead of in the internment camp. So you have, kind of two refugees from the war in a way, with Mies and Joseph both. Oops, I guess now I'm going to turn over to Mike to talk about the Farnsworth house, and then we'll come back and talk about the McCormick house, and then we'll compare the two.
Well, of course, the Farnsworth house needs no introduction, so I won't give you one. But has anybody been there to the Farnsworth house? It is open to the public and through November, but you have to call and do reservations. Just a plug for the Farnsworth. Turn on. And like a fine wine here, you're welcome to. There's a description in the National Register of Historic Places. That's like describing wine. Actually, it describes the building, so I'll read that. And this is a wonderful National Register of Historic Places document. And I've done quite a few myself, so I was interested to read this. It says the Farnsworth house. The Farnsworth house is raised above the ground of the surrounding floodplain. Its thin white columns contrasting with the darker, sinuous trunks of the surrounding trees. The calm stillness of the man-made object contrasts with the subtle movements, sounds, and rhythms of water, sky, and vegetation, shifting the viewer's awareness between the thrill of exposure to the raw elements of nature and the comforting stability of architectonic enclosure. Wow.
Did you write it?
But it's very well written, and actually it reads like a novel. You know, if you know a little bit about Edith Farnsworth and some of the situations. But anyway, again, it doesn't need much introduction, but there we are. And, whoops. Oh, who's that?
No.
Here, of course, are the big three planes of the Farnsworth house, built for Edith Farnsworth. Designed in 1945, a model of this house was put in the Museum of Art, Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1947. But the house wasn't really completed or even started until 1949 and completed in 1951. And actually, the guy sitting on the deck there is Maurice Parrish, who's the director of the house museum out there now. Actually, Edith Farnsworth was interested in becoming a concert violinist, but she felt she wasn't good enough, so she became a doctor. Anyway, like I said to some of you before, don't repeat anything that I say. You're not recording this, of course. She didn't think she was good enough to be a violinist, but she did become a very well-known doctor and very well respected. Then she wanted her country house out near Plano. She had some property there, and I think that there was a connection with the McCormicks.
Yeah, she bought the property from Colonel McCormick, who was the cousin of the McCormick house.
So there's all these connections, actually, that happen between these two houses, of course, and the common denominator is Mies van der Rohe. Now, Mies actually designed the resort house in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, first. And you can see it's 1938. And this was actually the model, or his guide for the Farnsworth house. And Mr. Resort, Stanley Resort, was an advertising executive. He headed up J. Walker Thompson Company, which you might have heard of. And this house was never built, but it was got a lot of notoriety at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Here's the model, actually, here. It actually has not steel and glass so much as it has stone at the base. The base here and the chimney. And this is cypress wood. And it spans over a creek. So, or it was to. It actually wasn't built. It was...
You can see the creek on the bottom there.
Pardon me?
You can see the blue on the...
Oh, yeah, that's the creek right there. Yes. Snake River Ranch is where it was to be in Jackson Hole. And Snake River Ranch actually is on the National Register of Historic Places now, and partly because of Mies's influence to the buildings there, even though he never designed any building that was built there. Other buildings were done by other architects who followed the international style. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, Mies van der Rohe and Dr. Farnsworth didn't get along after a while because of certain problems she felt. I don't know if it was with the house or with Mies. So anyway, here's what she says. Well, first of all, Mies thought that the architect was to come along with the house. But she was quoted as saying that that he was simply colder and more cruel than anybody I've ever known. Now, I'm not making this stuff up, but it was quite an interesting dilemma in the end. Oh, there he is again. Get rid of that guy. Okay, so here's the riverside elevation, which of course is raised up above the ground. It's important because it's in the floodplain along the Fox River, and very open. And then on the north side, which is away from the Fox River, it's very open as well. It's all glass all the way around. Actually, the glass stops at this point, and there's a deck, and then there's a lower deck, entry deck here. And the center core is actually very proportional to the forms of the house. And you can see that's the center core, which is, you're looking at the kitchen side. Right here, the other side had a fireplace, and two ends have bathrooms. And you can see it here. Here's actually the interior space. And then it extended to the outside, and then down to the deck, entry deck. And this is all travertine marble all the way through. So it keeps the white theme, the white painted steel. And the travertine marble, I guess I know too much about this house because I had a lot of meetings here with Lord Peter Colombo, who was the owner before the National Trust bought the property. And we met a lot at the house, but every spring he had to have the outside decks bleached because the leaves would sting them very terribly. And here's that core again in the center. Otherwise, it was pretty wide open. There's a wardrobe right here. Lord Colombo actually, when he took over the house, took out any furniture that had been left there and put in Miesian furniture. Now, I'll talk to that in just a few minutes about what Farnsworth did. But here's that picture again, the oil on canvas picture of Mies van der Rohe, which I believe was the kind of the model for this photograph that was done by Josef Karsh. And Josef Karsh was an Armenian photographer, actually. I remember walking down Michigan Avenue many years ago and seeing his name in his studio. But his, he was worldwide. Actually, just I think it's interesting who he has photographed as portraits of Walt Disney, Pope John XXIII, Winston Churchill, Ernest Hemingway, Eisenhower, Picasso, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. It doesn't quit. I'm a name dropper. Anyway, it's pretty impressive that Mies van der Rohe, of course, was part of his work. And John Singer Sargent was a painter who, I found a nice quote by him. He said, "Every time I make a portrait, I lose a friend." Now I wonder what this was about here, but this was one of the sketches. I don't know if this is the one you have in your gallery here. This is a ballpoint and charcoal sketch, but I think that was the precedent for this photograph, as a matter of fact, in 1961. Actually, this photograph that we see here is hanging now in the home of Bruno Contarado, who actually his son, Paul Contarado, has this on the wall in their house, but it was Bruno's house. And it's a very international style house, a lot of brick and glass overlooking the Geneva Golf Club in Geneva, Illinois. And I remember meeting Paul for the first time, and you know, everybody knows Bruno Contarado. Not, right? Okay, well it was Fujikawa, which Heidi mentioned, Contarado and Lohan. That was the name of the firm after Mies. It became Fujikawa, Contarado, and Lohan. And Lohan was Mies's grandson, Dirk Lohan. Well, Mr. Contarado actually was chairman of the board of that firm. And he built a very international style house out in Geneva, and that's where his son and his family, Paul Contarado. And I sat next to Paul at a lunch one time, introduced myself, and I said, you know, there's a famous architect with your same last name. And he said, that would be my father. So it was kind of fun, and now he's my friend forever. Because who else knows the name Bruno Contarado, right? But so I got Bruno Contarado's autograph in my book here on Mies van der Rohe by Franz Schultz. This is a very good book to read, to learn all about Mies and his life. Well, Myron Goldsmith actually was the project architect for the Farnsworth house, but I wanted to talk about, sidetrack a little bit here, with Peter Colombo. You can see he has a Miesian type cigar. If you've seen photographs of Mies, he often will have a very large cigar like this. And this is Lord Colombo with his wife Hyatt, who is actually Algerian. And I worked with them. They were my client back in the late 80s, early 90s. I met a lot at the Farnsworth house, but we were doing a restoration and reconstruction of the Eldridge house in Plano, which is a house they could live in when it wasn't the proper temperature or weather to stay in the Farnsworth house. If it was too cold or too hot, it was very difficult there. One of the first things that Lord Palumbo and Malord, we call him, did was to put air conditioning in the house because the ventilation was very bad. And he brought in Miesian furniture at that time too. But I wanted to talk about a project that was going on at the time that I was working with Lord Palumbo at Mansion House Square. Mies had designed in the 60s this high-rise to go in Mansion House Square. Well, it was problematic for people like Prince Charles, who was a polo partner with Lord Palumbo, and they lost their friendship over this because Prince Charles says that belongs in Chicago, not in London. About the restriction in Chicago. But just a little more on that particular building. Actually, this is what was built there. Designed by Sir James Stirling, because the other project by Mies was scrapped. That was going on while I was working with Lord Palumbo. So he hired James Stirling to be, and this is deconstructivist architecture. It looks like maybe some platforms for skydiving into ponds, or I'm not sure. But here's what was there. It was an 1870s building that he took out. And as a preservation architect, well, Heidi and I both have discussed this a little bit. That, well, I'm not going to say that. But this is what Peter Palumbo was doing. And with all due respects, I'm paid in full, so I think I want. That's what he took out. Now I have to tell you, some of you know that I spent in the last 4.5 years, I spent 3 years in Ukraine and 6 months in Armenia. I just came back 2 months ago from Armenia. And I got into trouble a lot when I was in Ukraine, talking about international style architecture. The newspapers would ask, well, what do you think about the city hall in Mies, Ukraine? That's where I was living. And I said, you need to respect this architecture as a product of its time. That's what I said. So the newspaper picks it up as, I love Soviet architecture. Okay. Well, that was a little twisted, and then we had a little problem with that because then this cartoon came out in the paper, and that's me. And that's my son. And I'm actually saying to my son, this is the Soviet architecture, which is very Miesian, very international style, doing the sandcastles in this style. But it actually says, great work, son, you're going to be a good architect like me someday. So it was a real slam, and we had to kind of reverse that with another article.
One paper would be sophisticated enough. We couldn't get that in the Chicago paper. Is this a specialized paper?
Well, this is a regular paper in Ukraine. It actually
Is in
goes all over.
Chicago sophisticated there? Could we have a cartoon? Would anyone understand that? In Chicago, do you think?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
It was a real slam at me, actually. In my organization, I was in the Peace Corps, actually, but I was working with a regional development organization in the city of Vinica, and they were upset about it. So we demanded, actually, the director demanded another article, which was a very positive article about even work I had done in the United States, but also what I was doing in Ukraine. It was very positive after this. And when this was in the paper with a editorial about this babbling American architect who likes Soviet architecture, and if you know about Ukraine a little bit now, there's a little conflict with Russia. Okay, well that's why I left, because we were evacuated out of the country, but after 3 years there, and under the cover of darkness, that's another story. But they really don't like Soviet architecture.
Nobody likes Soviet architecture.
Well, it's a product of its time, and you've got to respect that, right?
It's a product of its time and place, because you see a lot of that stuff, you know, things of that era in this country even, but
well, there's some architecture, I won't
It's
say
pretty
name,
dreary.
that I saw in Armenia, Soviet architecture, that's really brutalism. Yeah, brutalism is a kind of a style. It's not Miesian, but it's very interesting, and you gotta love it or hate it. You know, anyway, getting back to Lord Colombo, yeah, not Lord Colombo, but Mies van der Rohe, before Lord Colombo came along, Lord Colombo bought the building in 1972, but Mies van der Rohe sued Edith Farnsworth for $14,000. He sued first, and she countersued. And this case went to court at the Kendall County Courthouse, which I was happy, actually in 1958, it's a 1880s building originally. Bob Shelp, who I knew from Aurora, did these two additions to the building in 1958. We had a little different sensitivity, I think, towards architecture back then. But then in about the year 2000, I was working on reconstruction of a cupola and restoring the building. And that's where the trial went down, where Edith Farnsworth said that kind of theory that Mies has doesn't go down in Kendall County. Well, she lost the case, actually. So let me show you just the interior. Here's Mies with his cigar, and this is the interior of the courthouse. There's only one courthouse in the building on the second floor. We actually designed this is an extra story, but a room for Denny Castor, Speaker of the House. They asked me to take that off the drawings, saying, well, especially now, but the thing about Speaker of the House of Representatives was from Yorkville. And that his room was around the corner. We were going to reconstruct his Washington office. But here is Edith Farnsworth, where Franz Schultz, who wrote this book, right in this book, I don't make this stuff up, ungainly appearance and rather equine in features. So it wasn't very complimentary. But anyway, there was a real, I didn't put those two pictures close together because they belong separate. Okay, and so she's got a little problem with this whole deal about this lawsuit which she lost, but she's trying to adjust to the house. And my friend Glenn Kraft from St. Charles, I worked with him on several projects, was working with Watson and Moeller in Chicago, and they worked with her on interiors. A lot of this furniture is blonde wood and then other types of things which Mies would not approve, even the plants inside that he wouldn't approve, because you're supposed to look to the outside through the glass and be one with nature. But she's having a bad day, I guess. That is Edith Farnsworth talking about just how can she make this house work for her. She was very disappointed she couldn't live there. And so that's the last thing I have here.
So the McCormick house was a very different client and a very different reason for building it. So Robert McCormick Jr. Was working with his father and Greenwald on the development of the 860 and 880 Lakeshore Drive. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those high-rises. There were some of the first high-rises that were built in Chicago after the war, and of course they were apartments. And Robert, or Bob, as he was called, had joined his father. He was actually the sales agent for those projects, and so he was the one, signing people up for purchasing the apartments. And he had just recently gone through a divorce, and then he remarried. And he remarried to a woman named Isabella Stewart Gardner. And if any of you are art fans, you know of the museum in Boston with the same name, right? That was her great aunt. This is the great niece of the other Isabella Gardner. And so both of them came from very wealthy families. They've both been married before, both had children from a previous marriage. This was her third marriage, this was his second marriage. She had a son and daughter, he had a son and two daughters. So this was the house that they built for themselves. They were both very interested in modern art and modern architecture. And in this biography of her, they explained that she was more into the art and he was more into the architecture, but they were both very interested in modern design. So, and of course they knew Mies, And so they hired him to design this home for them in Elmhurst. They were married in it was June or July of 1951. This house was supposed to be completed in the fall of 51. It wasn't completed until the spring of 52, so it took a little longer. So obviously it was completed just shortly after the Farnsworth house went. So they're actually probably were under construction at some point at the same time. But this house wasn't just a house for them. It was supposed to be a prototype too. So this is, of course, its original location. So you can see the kind of the original setting here. And I'm going to just go through a few photos because we can't really see this view anymore. And I want you guys to kind of get a good feel for the house. So this is looking at the carport. This is where the corridor currently goes into it. So this is the main door right here. And then the living room's over here. And then this was looking straight into the carport. And then this is the back of the house. The original lot. And then this is the original layout. There are two wings. This was the adult wing, and this was the kids wing. So we had the master bedroom, the study, and the living room over here. And then we had the playroom, the kids' room, and then the maid's room, and the kitchen over here. So this was kind of the noisy wing, and this was supposed to be the more quiet, sedate wing, I guess. And of course we have the carport here, and this was post World War II, so carports were kind of a new thing, so it was kind of part of the modern ethos of the building. So this is in the living room looking out at the original setting. You can see the driveway here, you can see some of the houses in the neighborhood. The flooring here, unlike the marble that we had in the Farnsworth house, this is asphalt asbestos tile. So lower grade material in that way. Not that they didn't have the money to do something as good as Farnsworth did, but they had in mind doing something that was more middle class and that was going to be for some additional housing they were going to do. And then of course one of the other differences is like we have the brick walls, so not all of the walls were glass like in the Farnsworth house. We'll get into that a little more too. So this is the living room looking towards the core. So the studio is over to the study is over to the right, and then the master bedroom is back behind this wall here. And I just want to show you, I have a few photos of the living room, and the furniture kind of changes a little bit over time. As you notice, it's always kind of modern furniture. It's always this kind of sleek, clean lines. You don't see any kind of historic styles of furniture in the house. You're pretty sensitive, and pretty much throughout the time that it was used, that it was modern furniture that was in the house, unlike what you did. And then here's just another photograph of the living room. This is from the playroom looking back at the kitchen, and then you can see into one of the kids' room, you can see the desk behind it. And then this is from the kitchen looking towards the bedrooms, just the opposite direction of the last one. The kitchen in here is a St. Charles kitchen, so this is all a metal kitchen, and then we have wood cupboards with glass doors on the top. And just a couple other shots of the interior here. This is from the kitchen looking into, this would have been the maid's room. And then this is from the study looking back over towards the living room. So this is that front wall of the house. So as I mentioned before, this was a prototype for what they hoped was going to be some other housing they were going to do. There was actually a couple of different spots that they looked at to do this prototype housing. The first place they looked at was Melrose Park. So this is actually an article from 1951, so the same year they were designing the McCormick house. And this is the model of what were supposed to be some row houses that they were proposing for Melrose Park. And you'll notice there's a thicker line here kind of in the middle of this model that was to separate a couple of different units. You see the carport here, but these were, a little scaled down version of the McCormick house. Then we later got into, this was a separate single-family homes that were going to be put in Bensonville. So there was 4 of them that would have been identical there, which is basically one of the squares out of the McCormick house. Then we have the carport on the end. And so just wanted to, so here we have a comparison. This is the elevations of the McCormick house. These are the elevations of the proposed house. So you see it's a little bit shorter, but it's the same system. It's the same spacing, it's the same window system. There's brick walls at the end in both cases. This is only, one section thick, this is 2 sections thick, but it's the same basic materials, just put together in a little bit smaller form. So this is actually the current layout, well, kind of minus the museum part. So this is the hallway that comes in from the museum right now, and then this is what used to be the adult wing is now, well, it's actually all now gallery space. And then this is the back area of the house. So these were offices, and now that's all open back up. So. I think we're ready for the side by side. So yeah, so we talked about like the land for the Farnsworth house was bought from a McCormick. They're kind of huge. And then there's some comparisons. We have a river lot or we have a city lot, so that made some differences. That's why they put the brick at the end walls in the Farnsworth house. The McCormick house. And then there's a vacation home versus a second home and a prototype. So there was difference in what they selected for materials because of that. But interestingly, both houses had 2 private owners and then went into ownership by a nonprofit organization. So.
When both of these houses, in fact, more than both of these houses, the Reeser house was designed, and that was featured at the Museum of Modern Art. And there's one other house in the United States designed by Mies in Connecticut. So there's really only 3 houses. This house that's here, the Farnsworth house, and a house in Connecticut. Otherwise, he did mostly commercial structures, even though he did this proposal that Heidi talked about to do mass housing, actually. Mm-hmm. But House Beautiful magazine in 1953 actually, had an article about international style, and it was called The Threat to the Next America. And it really was a slam against Mies, Walter Gropius, and Le Corbusier, and others. But those are the main people that were attacked. And even Frank Lloyd Wright joined into the debate, and he made a comment. They were all supporting Edith Farnsworth. She went to the paper, or to the House Beautiful, to say, hey, this is going on, and it's not right. So Frank Lloyd Wright says, why do I distrust and defy such internationalism as I do communism? Because he felt that the promoters of the international style were totalitarian and also not wholesome people. So he came out and said this very directly.
He said they were not wholesome people?
Not wholesome people, correct. Well, this is Frank Lloyd Wright.
Call them middle black there.
I purposely didn't wear my right tie today, my Frank Lloyd Wright tie. Anyway, and they talked about Mies's statement, less is more, and the statement came out, less is less. And I've heard less is a bore. That's another twist on it. But the statement was made that something should be done about such architecture, or there will be no future for architecture in America. And when I was traveling in Ukraine and Armenia, I did programs on American architecture. I talked about the progression of architectural styles. There's always been a quest to have an American architecture, American style. And this is more of an international style, but even the Prairie style by Frank Lloyd Wright was maybe as closest we were getting to a really true American architecture. But I came to realize that there wasn't going to be a truly American style. There were Victorian styles, but that was copying, other styles in Great Britain, and probably the closest to an American style I realized when I talked to Ukrainians and my Armenian friends was Greek revival back in the mid-1800s, where it was a simple style. It was promoting Greek architecture and Greek successes and archaeology, actually, at the time. And I just wanted to say another thing about the Farnsworth house, too, that there is a problem with flooding. which you may know. And the last major flood was in 1996, so it's been a while ago. However, I'm on a task force for reviewing 3 options to mitigate the flood problem. And the flooding, they believe, and the engineers believe, came from development of lands in the area that raised the water lines and the flood lines. There's no place for this water, this rainwater, to dissipate into the soil with hard surfaces. So it really was about 3 feet over the floor level in the last flood. So the 3 options are raising the house in place, which would mean a lot of fill and a lot of cost and fill. And you know, when we talk about historic preservation, we always talk about integrity of the site. And that would change drastically the site. A lot of the trees would be destroyed, a lot of things would have to be changed. The other one, of course, is to move it on the site, move it up higher on the site. Of course, it is on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's also been designated a National Historic Site, which is a higher designation even than the National Register. And it would be in jeopardy of losing that status if it's moved to another location on the site and not have the same relationship to the river. So the third, and probably the most interesting option, is to put it on hydraulics and lift it at the site about 8 feet into the air above any floodwater. And with these hydraulics, the engineers have determined that it would take about 2 hours once the floods start to get it up into the air. And actually, that's the most interesting solution that I would support, actually. Because at the site, you would not know this. In fact, Mies's grandson has been involved, Dirk Lohan, and he likes that solution too, because he knows that the integrity of its appearance would not be changed. Because all this hydraulics would be underground, and you'd still see the open under the building, and everything would be the same. So, okay.
Who will be paying for the project, the hydraulic?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm sorry you brought it up, because it's a difficult answer. And I suggested who could pay for it myself at a meeting, and I thought it would be Lord Peter Colombo. But I didn't talk to my Lord about that. But you know, he has a sincere interest. He's a person who collects buildings like some people collect stamps. Okay, he owns Kentuck Knob that's in Pennsylvania. And you were there near Falling Water, but he has many other, even a Corbu property, and he owns a condo at 860 Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. And I do believe that he could help because he's sincerely interested and has a passion for Mies architecture. However, it would be privately funded. It's owned by the National Trust, and the National Trust is a privately funded organization, not for profit. It's not a government organization at all. So that's the difficult thing. And they're predicting it might cost about $5 million to do the hydraulics.
That's the most expensive option, isn't it?
Well, actually, the option to raise it in place is very expensive because of all the land work that has to be done. So that's around $3 million we estimated. I mean, give $1 million here and there, but it's still very expensive.
So let's get to the comparison. So we don't have a comparison.
All right, we'll catch you at the end.
So we wanted to just go through and do some side-by-side comparisons. Obviously, you can see some similarities in form, where we've got, you know, kind of 2 rectangles offset from each other in a little different way. Interestingly, the spacing here, 4 bays in the McCormick house is equal to 1 of the bays in the Farnsworth house.
Wow.
So they're actually a module of each other in that way.
This is about 22 feet.
Right.
Over
And these are
between the 2.
5.5 feet each. So 4 of these adds up to 20.
There's really 8 columns, including out of the porch where it supports the roof. So there's 6 within the enclosed structure, where there's quite a few.
Right. So of course, because they were different uses, this is basically a cabin, a very modern cabin, but a cabin in the woods. So there wasn't really a need for the interior partitions. Where here, this was going to be a family home. So they did need to have partitions. In fact, there's a story that they originally weren't going to put a door on the master bedroom, and McCormick couldn't get Joseph to agree to do that, so he had to go to Mies to get the door to bed. Because he was trying to be a purist, like, no, we shouldn't be, he's trying to minimize the number of doors. But obviously just from a family function standpoint, the parents needed a door to their bedroom.
Yeah, just in terms of the floor plan too, this is like a separate island within an open space, but also there was a lot of problems with bugs along the river, and this was like a light that attracted the bugs to the building. And Edith Farnsworth hired another architect, William Dunlap, to design a screened-in area with bronze screens all around the outside here, which he did. And actually, William Dunlap's wife was a patient of Dr. Farnsworth, so that was the connection. But actually, Mr. Dunlap worked on the Sears Tower as well when he was working at Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. And they had a son who was a writer, David Dunlap. And he wrote about the time his parents came to stay, where do you put somebody up for the weekend? But, and say that Edith Farnsworth had 2 dogs that just ran in circles around this area here. And also they were plagued by the bugs, so they had a very uncomfortable stay there.
So of course, one of the other kind of structural differences in the 2 houses is, of course, this is elevated, and this is on grade. So we have our traditional concrete footings, and so it made a difference in how the mechanical systems and everything was handled as well. So here we don't have any underground area to put, mechanical ducts, whereas in the Farnsworth house, the mechanical ducts were below. So the roof structure on the McCormick house is actually thinner than it is on the Farnsworth house, because a lot of those utilities and stuff ended up being put into that roof to ceiling structure in the Farnsworth house.
This is the mechanical floor right here.
So in McCormick house, these were actually kind of 2 separate houses. We actually had a separate one mechanical for this group and one mechanical for this space. So it's zoned. Yep.
So you can see it's open underneath, but this little form right here is where the mechanicals go into the ground. The water, sewer, gas, all came through this area into that center core, and you can see some mechanical exhaust on the roof. But everything was blowing out from this area for heating and cooling, and whether it made it to the outside windows was questionable. And there was only 2 window vents at the east end, the far end, and then the 2 doors, but originally they didn't have screens on them.
So interesting enough, all of these are operable windows in the McCormick house. So both sides had all these operable windows, so you could get cross ventilation through the house. So from a natural ventilation standpoint, this house was much better. And one of the things he did different here too is that these are actually a standard window system. So here you've got like special plate glass or large openings, and these were a modular of a standard system that you could get. And they did originally have screens. So maybe he learned from this one and put them on this one.
So that one has to be air conditioned all the time.
Both houses were built without air conditioning, and the second owners of both houses put air conditioning in.
It wasn't until 1972, this was 1951, the original construction, when Edith Farnsworth moved in, but Peter Palumbo put the air conditioning in 1972. And he made the changes with the furnishings. And, my friend Glenn Kraft, I wish he was around today because he's got so many stories about Edith Farnsworth and working with her. Watson Buller and Buller were a big company in Chicago that were very well known. And she went there for their assistance in furnishing this cottage.
So on the McCormick house, the second owners, I think I forgot to mention, was Raymond Fick, who was one of the mayors here in Elmhurst in the 70s. He and his family lived in this house for 30 years. And they did some remodeling in the 70s. I don't know the exact date, but that's when they added air conditioning as well. So the air conditioning was added to both these homes around the same time.
First, again, you can see there's a tube right in the center here behind this column. That's the mechanical.
So obviously they're both wooded sites, even though one is a city site and the other isn't. And that, I think, was an important thing with McCormick houses, is that, or both of the Mies houses, is that they have that view to the outside of the nature.
And these draperies were not to be there, according to Mies. And that's, Glenn Craft worked with Edith Farnsworth to add the draperies in. And Mies didn't want any there because you needed to be one with nature and have a view. But interesting now, there's a state park across the river, and people can look right across, especially in the fall when the leaves drop. You look right into the house. Peter Palumbo, actually, I know, put an alarm system at the river too. So if anybody came on shore, they would trip. I guess I know too much about that. So don't try that. Okay, these are St. Charles cabinets as well, in both houses. McCormick house, this is the Farnsworth house. There's some similarities here with the sink right here. And this is the center core. That's the playroom near the McCormick house, and here it's just open to view through the glass.
So you can see there's, certainly the kitchens were very, very similar.
But here-
Another side note, we took delivery yesterday of a St. Charles kitchen, which has been donated to the museum, so hopefully we'll be exhibiting that after we talk with Heidi.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I noticed when I was working with Peter Palumbo and Hyatt, his wife, this countertop was just lined up with wine bottles, just as we have here. And also, there were certain knickknacks around the house too, like a Chinese vase. I remember the day that the maid dropped it when she was cleaning, and Peter, Lord Palumbo, said, "I'll just take it back. I'm going to stop at New York on the way back to London, and I know somebody there who can fix it." And when it came back, it was perfect. It was unbelievable. But he's such a mild-mannered guy. Except that Hyatt was a little bit different, though, when there was a lady named Judy Cork who I worked with. She was the property manager for this property and Kentucky, not in Pennsylvania. And Judy actually was, basically fired because she wouldn't call Peter, who she always called Peter for years, and this was a new wife for Peter Hyatt, wouldn't call him my lord and my lady. So she had to go, but she couldn't bring herself to not call him Peter. Here's the living room, of course, with Peter Palumbo's furniture. And this is the wardrobe back here that divides the bedroom, the only bedroom there. So it's very difficult to have guests in a cottage like this.
So some of the things, this is, obviously, this is the fireplace built in here. There's no fireplace in the McCormick house, but there was this built-in shelf along there. So there were some kind of minimalist built-ins in both of the houses to accommodate a little bit of stuff. We didn't have, there weren't really any closets other than mechanical closet in the Farnsworth. So then the wardrobe was kind of this piece of furniture, really almost a piece of furniture. Yeah.
There is one thing that Lord Palumbo added in 1972, and that's a hearth for the fireplace, because it wasn't there with the travertine marble. They didn't feel they needed it, but that was getting used. Marble was getting darkened and whatever from many fires. So he added that, but otherwise this is how it would have been without the curtains.
So another thing you should notice here is we have the exposed beams here, and then we have a smooth plaster ceiling here. And this is actually, you can see the little lines through here. This is actually painted plywood, which is the ceiling in the McCormick house. So again, it was a little bit, more readily available, less expensive materials that we were using here in this house.
This is plaster here.
Right. And then, of course, you see the difference in the flooring as well.
So that wood there is on the left is not closet, all that?
This is a wardrobe.
No, but on the left there, nothing on that is.
No, actually there are some cabinets there. There's some cabinets, but then behind this wall is mechanicals. So there are some cabinets that are hidden without holes, just to create a nice clean, easy look.
So I'm going to have to just show you kind of some comparisons. So there's 9'5" ceilings in the Farnsworth house, but there was only from this line, so the bottom of the beams, down to the floor, and McCormick is 8 feet, so a little bit less far. And then of course you see the depth of this detail of the Farnsworth.
This is
versus
15 inches.
This detail here.
Part of the frame, channel.
But that channel there,
That's exposed to the outside.
yeah, that's exact same size as this channel here. So there was, they kind of you know, some of it was the same as far as like sizing of some of the members and stuff, but just handled in a different way.
And I will say that this detail here, if you have to compare the details, this has like, it's made out of steel, but it's like a flashing and then a drip here. And this is probably one of the worst details I've ever seen in my whole career as an architect. And I'm sorry.
I know.
Because the water will just seep right in there and come down. And so that's the problem that Heidi's working with.
One of the problems we're going to be working with. So, Mike already mentioned that there are, you know, plans to do some work at the Farnsworth house to try to preserve that for future generations. And so the other thing that we're going to be starting here soon on the McCormick house is we're also going to start doing some restoration on this house. So what we're going to be starting here, hopefully starting in the next week or two, is we're actually going to start repainting the exterior of the house. We found that there was 9 layers of paint on the house, and it was all different types of paint, and they were different, like incompatible types of paint, and it was peeling off in large chunks right down to the steel. The steel is got a layer of rust on it. So we're actually going to be taking all of the paint off of it, sandblasting that off, and then repainting it with a 3-coat, very high-performance paint system, which, by the way, is the one they use on the Farnsworth house. So, you know, why reinvent the wheel if we know that it's worked well on another piece house? So you'll see some scaffolding and some signs and stuff going up here very soon on that house as well. And then
The paint is Temenic, which is cement spilled backwards, and just as another interesting side note, it's the same paint that David Wallace Haskins, the artist of Sky Cube, used on Sky Cube. So if you had a chance to see that on the patio, that's 3 tons of steel with 3 coats of Temenic paint,
Yeah.
which was conscious on his part,
Right.
intentional to add to the house.
right, and it's just a good finish for a steel building. So both houses are going to be hopefully seeing some work on them soon.
And there was a question before.
I had a question. And Philip Johnson's house is taken from Mies concepts, right?
Right.
Because the
Well, it was built about
the
the
building
same
was
time.
very early, but
Or a little
It was
earlier,
49.
actually.
He kind of stole the idea from me because he was
he
the
still,
one.
he still.
Well, it was in the
He
Museum
was
of
the
Modern
curator
Art.
of the exhibit, and
Yeah,
that
because when you just look it up online, the date of this is later than Philip Johnson's house.
yes. Philip, I think he-
Actually,
But you
it
know
was
what?
conceived of earlier, right?
Yeah, actually,
just like
the
to-
Resort House was 1938. And that was exhibited.
The one that wasn't built.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
In
The one over the
Museum
street.
of Modern Art in those early years, in the late 30s. So Philip Johnson, of course, knew about that. And
So, yeah,
There's a
so
lot of
none of this was
collaboration.
Philip Johnson, that makes sense. But that's right.
Well,
But
and-
Philip Johnson's house didn't express the steel like this. The glass is totally on the outside without exposing the steel and doing a ribbon quite the same. So there's a lot of differences. That would have been the third slide, but we only had 2 projectors. To compare that would be a good comparison, actually, with Philip Johnson.
Well, they often compare them and
Right.
talk about which one is first, but I think it's pretty sure.
well, the
Mies had
design
the idea.
for the Farnsworth came first, but the Johnson glass house was built first. So they each have it first, I guess.
Well,
Very, very diplomatic.
Any other questions?
Thank you.